The rain poured in relentless sheets as Mia drove down the empty road, the rhythmic drumming against the metal roof amplifying the oppressive silence that surrounded her. The dim glow of her headlights carved a narrow path through the night, illuminating the twisted silhouettes of trees that loomed ominously on either side. She'd just finished her shift at the diner, the last remnants of laughter and clinking dishes still echoing in her mind, but now all that remained was an unsettling quiet. As she navigated the winding curves, a feeling of dread settled in her stomach. She had taken this route countless times, yet tonight it felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the very air was charged with something sinister. She tried to shake off the feeling, focusing instead on the road ahead, but the unsettling static on the radio pulled her thoughts back into the realm of unease. Suddenly the static gave way to a low, distorted whisper that echoed in the car. Mia. Mia, it slithered through her mind, wrapping around her thoughts like a serpent. Her heart raced, and she glanced around, half expecting to see someone sitting in the back seat, but she was alone. Just a trick of the mind, she told herself, but the chill that crept down her spine said otherwise. With each passing mile, the whispering grew louder, an insistent chant that drowned out her thoughts. She tried to focus on the road, but the shadows outside seemed to stretch and warp, twisting into grotesque shapes that flickered in the corners of her vision. And then, just as she rounded a bend, her headlights illuminated a figure standing eerily still by the roadside. A woman, pale and gaunt, her hair a wild tangle that obscured her face, seemed to beckon. Mia's breath hitched in her throat, and she turned away, willing herself to keep driving. But when she glanced back, the woman had vanished, leaving only a haunting chill in the air. Panic twisted in her chest, and she pressed the gas pedal harder, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of the woods. The whispering returned, sharper now, urging her to turn back. You shouldn't be here. You should turn back. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, fear surging through her veins. She wanted to pull over, to scream, but she pressed on, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, up ahead, she spotted something out of place, a car parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights flickering weakly against the rain-soaked pavement. Her curiosity wrestled with fear, but compassion won out. What if someone was in trouble? She pulled over, her heart racing. As she stepped out into the storm, cold raindrops hit her skin like needles. The abandoned vehicle looked as though it had been there for ages, rusted and covered in grime. Hello, she called, her voice barely rising above the storm. Silence answered her, heavy and oppressive. The driver's side door hung open, revealing an empty seat and the scattered belongings of a previous occupant. She peered inside, unease creeping into her mind. And then she noticed a trail of muddy footprints leading into the woods. Against her better judgment, an insatiable curiosity urged her forward. She stepped off the road, following the footprints, her heart pounding with each step into the darkened forest. The whispering resumed, now a low hum that wrapped around her, enticing her deeper into the trees. Mia, join us. The trees felt alive, their twisted branches seeming to close in around her. The air thickened, and with every step, the shadows grew darker, almost sentient in their pursuit. She pressed on, the ground slick beneath her shoes, until she stumbled into a small clearing. The moonlight broke through the canopy, illuminating a crude altar surrounded by what looked like remnants of clothing and scattered bones, remnants of those who had come before. Panic surged within her. As she turned to flee, the ground trembled beneath her feet. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, whispering and clawing at her. You've come to join us, they beckoned, their voices a cacophony of longing and despair. Mia ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers morphed into a screaming chorus, each voice a fragment of a soul trapped in darkness. Stay with us. You belong to us now. The shadows twisted and merged, coiling around her, pulling her down into the depths of despair. Just when she thought she would be swallowed whole, she burst from the trees and found herself back on the road. Her car stood where she had left it, the headlights flickering in the rain. But the sense of safety was fleeting. She could feel them, the whispers still echoing in her mind. As she jumped into the driver's seat, she felt the cold brush of fingers against her neck, sending chills racing down her spine. Heart pounding, she slammed the door shut and fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and she tore down the road, desperate to escape the nightmare she had stumbled into. But as she drove, the road began to twist and change, as if mocking her attempts to flee. The trees closed in, and every glance into the rearview mirror revealed shadowy figures lingering just beyond the reach of her headlights. The man from before, his familiar face haunting her thoughts, suddenly appeared by the roadside, drenched and desperate. "You need to turn back," he shouted, his voice drowned by the storm. "They'll take you if you stay." Mia's heart raced. "Who are you?" she screamed as she drove past him. But even as she called out, she felt the grip of despair tightening around her, the whispers returning, a chilling promise that echoed in her ears. "You will never leave." The man's warning echoed in her mind, but she pressed on, pushing the car to its limits. She refused to look back, but the shadows grew bolder, flickering in her peripheral vision. They seemed to dance, taunting her, whispering secrets that chilled her blood. "You can't escape." Suddenly the headlights flickered and her vision blurred. In that moment of darkness, she felt the car lurch as if something had collided with it. She swerved, heart racing, but when she glanced around, there was nothing, only the encroaching shadows that wrapped around her. Then, out of nowhere, she spotted another figure ahead, a man standing on the roadside. Relief washed over her. "Help," she shouted, pulling over once more, desperate for someone to save her from the darkness. But as she drew closer, her heart sank. It was the same man from before, his expression grim and haunted. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They're watching you." Before she could respond, the shadows surged forward, coiling around the car, pulling at her. "Join us. Join us," the whispers grew frantic, rising in a chilling crescendo. Mia felt the weight of their presence, and in that moment she understood they were not merely shadows, they were souls trapped between realms, crying out for release. But she wouldn't give in. Summoning her courage, she stepped out of the car, facing the man. "What do I do?" "You need to confront them," he urged, desperation in his eyes. "Face your fear. Only then can you escape." The shadows writhed around her, their whispers morphing into screams of rage. "You can't leave. You belong to us." With a surge of determination, Mia shouted back, "I won't be a part of this. I refuse." Her voice echoed through the night, a challenge to the darkness. The shadows recoiled, hesitating as if her words had struck a chord. "Keep fighting," the man shouted, his voice carrying through the chaos. "Don't let them take you." With every ounce of strength, Mia pressed forward, pushing through the enveloping darkness. The figures began to writhe and twist, their forms becoming grotesque as they reached for her, but she stood her ground. "You can't have me," she screamed, her voice rising above the cacophony. And then, just as it seemed the shadows would overwhelm her, a blinding light erupted from within her, illuminating the darkness. The figures shrieked, recoiling in fear. The whispers turned into cries of anguish, and for the first time Mia felt a sense of power coursing through her veins. As the light grew, the shadows began to dissipate, unraveling like smoke in the wind. The figures writhed, their anguished faces twisted in pain. "No, you belong to us," they wailed, but Mia's light grew stronger, fueled by her resolve. With one final cry, she raised her hands, and the darkness shattered, exploding into a shower of sparks that rained down around her. The forest fell silent, the shadows retreating into the depths from which they had emerged. Panting, Mia fell to her knees, her heart racing, but she was free. She glanced around, the woods now quiet and still, the threat of the shadows lifted. The man stood beside her, his expression a mix of awe and relief. "You did it," he whispered, as the moonlight broke through the clouds above, illuminating the path ahead. "You broke their hold." But as she stood, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. "What if they come back?" she asked, fear creeping in. He shook his head, a reassuring smile on his lips. "You faced them. They can't take you again. You're stronger now." With the road ahead stretching into the distance, Mia felt a sense of hope, a new beginning. But just as she turned to leave, the air shifted. The shadows, now a whispering haze, began to curl back from the forest, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath pale faces staring back at her, eyes wide with despair. "Leave us," one voice begged, cracking with sorrow. "You were one of us." "No," Mia shouted, stepping back as a wave of fear washed over her. "I won't let you take me." The shadows surged forward, a tide of desperate souls clamoring to pull her back into their realm. The air thickened with their anguish, each cry a sharp dagger of regret. You belong to the road. You are part of the endless night. Mia felt the weight of their despair settle on her, heavy and suffocating. The man next to her grasped her hand tightly. "You must stand firm. Remember the light. They can't hold you if you believe in your freedom." Gathering her strength, Mia closed her eyes and summoned the light that had burned within her moments before. It flickered at first, but as she envisioned her escape, it flared back to life, bright and pure. "I am not yours," she declared, feeling the warmth radiate from her core. The shadows recoiled, shrieking in unison, their faces twisting into masks of fury and desperation. "You will return. You will join us," they wailed, but Mia's resolve solidified, the light pushing against the encroaching darkness. With each breath, she felt the light grow stronger, illuminating the path ahead, driving back the shadows that had once threatened to consume her. "I am free," she shouted, and the forest shuddered at her declaration. But just as victory seemed within her grasp, the air grew still, a heavy silence settling like a shroud. The man's expression darkened as he stared into the shadows, horror blooming in his eyes. "No, this can't be." Before Mia could question him, a shape emerged from the darkness, a monstrous figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes burning with malice. "You think you can escape?" it hissed, a voice like ice scraping against stone. "You are merely a flicker in the dark." Mia's heart sank. This was not just a collection of lost souls, it was their leader, the architect of their torment. The shadows coiled around it like a serpent, feeding off the despair of those it had claimed. "You'll join us, Mia," it taunted, reaching out with elongated fingers that dripped with darkness. "You will be ours." Fear coursed through her, but the light within her pulsed in defiance. "I won't let you take me," she shouted, her voice echoing through the stillness. "I choose to fight." With newfound determination, she focused all her energy into the light, feeling it surge and expand, enveloping her in its warmth. The figure snarled, the shadows recoiling from the brightness. "You think your light can save you? You are nothing." It screeched, but Mia pressed on, pushing the light outward, a beacon in the darkness. As Mia and the man walked into the moonlit distance, the oppressive silence of the forest began to encroach once more. With each step, she could feel a familiar chill creeping along her spine, an insistent whisper clawing at the edges of her mind. "You cannot escape," it echoed, a cruel reminder of what she had just faced. Suddenly, the light from the moon flickered, and the shadows deepened, twisting into familiar forms that danced just out of reach. Panic surged within her as she turned to the man, but he stood still, his face blank, eyes reflecting a depth of sorrow that sent chills coursing through her. "Mia," he said softly, his voice low, almost mournful. "You think you've won, but the darkness knows you now. It has marked you." Her heart raced as the shadows began to thicken around them, coiling tighter, whispering secrets of despair that tugged at her sanity. "No, I won't let them take me," she screamed, but the words felt hollow against the rising tide of darkness. The man stepped closer, a look of profound sadness etched across his features. "You're already one of us," he whispered, his voice a haunting melody of regret. The shadows surged forward, clawing at her, pulling her into a swirling vortex of despair. "No, this can't be happening," Mia fought against the pull, but the darkness enveloped her, wrapping around her limbs like cold iron chains. She could feel the whispers intensifying, a cacophony of voices crying out in anguish, each one resonating with a part of her soul. "Join us. You belong here." With one final burst of defiance, Mia summoned the light within her, but it flickered weakly, dimming against the onslaught of shadows. "I won't give in," she shouted, but her voice trembled, faltering as the darkness encroached. The last thing she saw was the man's face, twisted in sorrow, before the shadows swallowed her whole. In that moment, a chilling silence fell, the forest closing in around her, the echoes of lost souls merging into a haunting lullaby. And then, there was only darkness, a suffocating void where hope had once flickered, leaving Mia to wander the empty roads forevermore, a lost soul bound to the whispers of the night. The shadows had claimed another, waiting patiently for the next unwary traveller to wander too close, their whispers now a part of the eternal night.